Hello there, I am Joe Crimson, and today I want to talk about my favorite game on each Nintendo console. Ever since I was a kid, I loved playing on my Nintendo consoles. I grew up on the Super Nintendo, even though I was born in the late 90s, and over the years I've played tons of games on every major console Nintendo has ever released. So today I thought it would be fun to look at each of those systems and determine what my favorite game in each catalog is. And I've ended up with a list that fits me very well. Some of these picks will be among the most well-known and loved games on these systems, but I also have a few hidden gems, and perhaps some very personal picks in this list. We're going to be looking at each console in chronological order from oldest to newest, so we will be starting with the NES and ending with the Nintendo Switch. The NES is in all honesty the system that I'm the least familiar with. I've played a lot of the classics, sure, but there's not a lot of games on the system that I really put a lot of hours in. This made it pretty hard to make a good choice. I initially debated just taking the easy way out and putting Legend of Zelda or Super Mario Bros. 3 here, and then something else dawned on me. Castlevania. Truth be told, the first time I played this game was on the Wii U Virtual Console, and I had already played a lot of the other classics as a kid. But somehow this game resonated with me a lot more than anything else on the NES did. The game was tough, but never frustrating. It felt genuinely satisfying when I finally got to the end and finished this one. And quite honestly, this is the only NES game that made me feel like that. And that's why this is my NES pick. Next up is the original Game Boy. A lot of games I thought about for this system honestly haven't really aged very well for me. Any of the classics I just don't really have a lot of fun with anymore when I play them nowadays. Luckily there are a handful of exceptions. Link's Awakening comes to mind. Contra is another good one. But my pick here is Wario Land. Super Mario Land 3. I will admit that this one is very nostalgia coded for me, as it was the first Game Boy game I ever played. However, I feel like my choice would have been the same if I played this one later in life anyway. The Wario Land take on the classic Mario platforming formula I found really interesting. It's simple, but still fun. And when replaying it later in life, I had a great time finding all the secrets and hidden treasures to try and get the best ending. And honestly, I think this game simply fits the Game Boy perfectly. And it's the one game that still makes me want to pick up the classic Game Boy to this day. In the beginning of this video, I already mentioned that the Super Nintendo was the console I grew up on. As a result, a lot of my all-time favorite games are on this console. This makes it a very difficult choice for me. If I made a top favorite games of all time video, half of it would probably be on the Super Nintendo. However, in the end, I knew there was only one top choice for me on this system. Super Ghouls and Ghosts. This is one of the most infamous games on the Super Nintendo, which I understand. This game can be very unforgiving, especially to first-time players. However, for me, this is an all-timer. I have a lot of fond memories of trying to figure out how to defeat the Stage 7 boss with the bracelet as a kid, together with my father. Later in life, I ended up speedrunning this game for a while, and it's a very prominent part of my gaming tattoo sleeve. It might not be the most obvious choice for a lot of Super Nintendo fans, but all things considered, it was really the only choice for me. I'm now realizing, I'm picking a lot of platformers for these, aren't I? Well, that isn't going to change anytime soon, because my favorite Nintendo 64 game is Banjo-Kazooie. I debated for a long time between Banjo-Kazooie and the two Zelda games, but considering how often I still replay Banjo-Kazooie nowadays, it seems like the right choice. Even to this day, after what must have been dozens of playthroughs, the game just doesn't stop being fun. The platforming is as close to perfection as you can get on the Nintendo 64. The worlds are engaging and fun to explore, and don't even get me started on how good the music in this game is. One little thing about this game that I personally really appreciate is that they made it very replay friendly. You can skip pretty much any cutscene and text box, which after this many playthroughs is really appreciated, because I can just get straight into the core gameplay without any interruptions. I initially wasn't sure on whether or not to give the Game Boy Color a separate entry from the Game Boy, but in the end I decided to just do it, especially considering I don't know when else I would ever mention the game I have picked for this. Game & Watch Gallery 3 might seem like a bit of an odd choice, but to this day, I still boot up this game whenever I have a few minutes to kill and I don't really know what else to do. And to me, that is what the Game Boy systems are really all about. A collection of Game & Watch games to just pick and play for a few minutes is a really nice thing to have, and I really like the reimaginings they gave to some of these. Moving on to the Game Boy Advance, we finally have a Zelda game showing up. For every single system so far, I had their respective Zelda games near the top of my list. But on the Game Boy Advance, one of them finally takes the cake, and that is The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. This game always felt like the ultimate Game Boy Advance game to me. They really did a good job combining what makes Zelda great and what makes the Game Boy Advance great in this one. The dungeons are fun, the Minish gimmick is very creative, and I really enjoyed trying to solve all the Kinstone puzzles as a kid. It's also interesting to note that this game was developed by Capcom, which means so far I've picked as many Capcom developed games as Nintendo developed games in this list. Interesting. Next up we have the Nintendo Gamecube. My choice for this system may seem a little bit out of left field, but I have a personal story connected to this game that brings it very close to me. My favorite Gamecube game is Bloody Roar Primal Fury. A lot of fighting game fans would probably ask me, why wouldn't you go with Soul Calibur 2 here? Or even Super Smash Bros. Melee? And honestly, if it wasn't for the story I'm about to tell, my choice here probably would have been Melee. When I was a kid, we had a pretty close family friend that we would often visit. He was a huge game collector and a big Nintendo fan, just like myself. Whenever we came over, I would always get the game on his GameCube, and the specific game of choice would always be Bloody Roar Primal Fury. Unfortunately, he passed away while I was still fairly young, but to this day, playing this game still takes me back to the good times I always had over there. And that is why I simply felt like there was no better pick for me than this. The Nintendo DS was a huge part of my preteen and early teen years. I played on this thing a lot, and I played many different games as well. I initially debated picking Mario Kart DS here, since that was the party game that we would play in school all the time. In the end, there was one game that stood supreme for me on this system: Pokemon Platinum. This is to this day still my favorite Pokemon game of all time. The story was interesting, the Pokemon designs were great, and whenever I replay this game, it keeps me motivated to go to the end all the way through. In a catalog full of games that are filled to the brim with nostalgia for me, this is the one that I find myself wanting to come back to most frequently. The Wii was an interesting console for me. I'm very nostalgic for it since it was a huge part of my teenage years, but I had a hard time trying to think of a specific game that really felt like it could take this spot. I was really close to going with Monster Hunter Tri, as this was the game that introduced me to one of my favorite gaming series and is probably my most played Wii game. But in the end, I decided to go with a bit of a hidden gem: Pandora's Tower. This is a lesser known RPG on the Wii, though I remember at the time it would get compared to Xenoblade Chronicles a lot. This game has managed to stay in my memory like no other Wii game has been able to. The story is memorable and unique, and the gameplay is very interesting, and it takes a lot of advantage of the Wii's gimmicks without feeling too forced. And just like Super Ghouls and Ghosts, which I mentioned earlier, I also enjoyed this game enough to make it a part of my gaming tattoo sleeve. The 3DS was one of the few systems in this video where I knew what game I wanted to pick right from the start: Kid Icarus Uprising. This game was what made the 3DS for me. I was one of the few that picked up the 3DS at launch, and like many others, I felt very disappointed with what it had to offer within its first year. But when Kid Icarus Uprising came out, it all suddenly felt worth it to me. This game felt like it truly had it all on the 3DS. It made me want to actually keep the 3D slider on. The story was fun and the gameplay was sublime. At the time, I also had a lot of fun with the online mode that this game had. Unfortunately, I am left-handed though, which means I had to buy that awkward Circle Pad Pro accessory to play this game properly, since it was very touchscreen reliant. But despite that, this still remains the top game on the console for me. At the time, I even considered it as a potential all-time favorite. Monster Hunter Tri may have missed out on the Wii, but it gets a little bit of revenge, as the upgraded version, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, is my pick for the Wii U. This honestly ended up being a very easy choice. The Wii U, with its short lifespan, has a very limited pool of games to choose from, and a lot of the more interesting titles were either remakes of old games or just weren't really that up to par. Luckily for me, there was Monster Hunter. This is probably my most played gaming franchise of all time, and the third generation is where it all got started for me, even if it wasn't specifically with 3 Ultimate. I still ended up putting a ton of hours into this one, to the point where I've probably played it more than all other Wii U games combined. That alone is already enough to make this a very simple choice for me. Finally, we have the Nintendo Switch, the last system featured in this video, and also one of the harder ones to make a choice for. I had a lot of difficulty trying to choose between Super Mario Odyssey and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Both of these are among my favorite games of all time. In the end, I decided to go with Super Mario Odyssey. This is probably my favorite 3D Mario game. The amount of fun I have exploring all the different kingdoms is honestly just unmatched. The way you go around the kingdom collecting moons and purple coins honestly reminds me of Banjo-Kazooie in a lot of ways. And I think in 10 plus years from now, this is going to be the game that I remember the Nintendo Switch by most fondly. It's not even that old yet, and I already feel super nostalgic whenever I start playing this game again. And every single time, I feel motivated to try and find all 800 plus moons and the purple coins. This game perfectly capsules what makes gaming great for me. And there we have it, my favorite games on each Nintendo console. I feel like there's a good mix of things in the list, even though we did start out with 4 platformers in a row. I also find it interesting to see that my favorite gaming franchise, The Legend of Zelda, only ended up appearing once. In any case, thank you all for watching this video, I really appreciate it. Feel free to let me know your pick for each of these consoles down in the comments. I would love to know everyone's different taste. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and join the mosh pit down in the comments. For now, thanks again for watching and I will see you all later. Goodbye.